a lot of people are not getting enough protein.
Higher protein across the board is going to save more lives than it would ever hurt in younger people.
On the other hand,
so the muscleheads who are having a lot of meat and a protein shake and a protein bar are turning all that into carbs and fats at the end of the day.
I feel like this is a huge scam.
Yes.
The most controversial area in nutrition longevity today is not carbs. It's not fat, it's protein. Today I will cover protein myths, focus on longevity, autophagy, and aging. How much protein does your body truly need? You're about to be surprised. And if you are over age 60, this video can save your life. Before the first myth, what is exactly protein? Protein is a macronutrient you receive from food. When you consume this macronutrient, your body digests it into small molecules called amino acids. These small molecules are building blocks that are essential for the body to repair tissues, to make enzymes, hormones, and to form our hair and fingernails. So far, common sense. Protein is a building block. But if our story ends here, then we shall conclude that we need to make sure that we simply get at least enough protein. Basic physics, or the economics of the body. But it is not so. This leads us to the first myth about protein. In a second, I will show you how I've used this myth to gain 4 pounds of pure muscles in just 4 weeks. Myth number 1. Protein is a simple building block. Would you say that your genes matter? If you said yes, I agree. What about your hormones? Hormones are messengers, chemical messengers, that travel in your blood and tell your entire body what to do. Let me rephrase that because this is super important for today. Your body has 30 trillion cells, and these hormones, they float around in your circulation and tell everyone what to do. So do you agree that these chemicals are powerful? If you said yes, I agree. The mystery though, who tells your genes and hormones what to do? To a large extent, it's protein. Specifically, how much protein exactly you eat every day. As you will see, variations, even in tiny grams per day, can affect your genes and hormones dramatically. Before I prove it to you, if what I said is the truth, then this means that the question of how much protein you need is not as important as the question which genes and hormones do you want to activate to achieve what you want to gain, to achieve your goal. So let's get back to hormones. Let's start with one of the most powerful hormones in your body. It's called IGF-1. Its initials mean insulin-like growth factor 1. IGF-1 is the active chemical from the growth hormone, HGH. Therefore, IGF-1 is the most powerful growth hormone in our bodies. It helps cells to grow. It helps us to build muscle mass and bone mass. And it also helps in rejuvenation. How does protein, how much protein we eat every day, affect IGF-1? I'm quoting from this study. Besides its role as a brick provider for building the organic matrix of skeletal tissues, dietary protein stimulates the production of anabolic bone trophic factor IGF-1. Dietary protein means the protein coming from our diet. So here they refer to the IGF-1 that affects the bone. Bone IGF-1 is a hormone that helps in building bones. Consuming high protein, dietary protein as they said, tells the body to make more of it. It's not that your bones really need more protein as a building block. It's more that your bones need more instructions to build bones, which comes from this bone IGF-1. And what controls IGF-1 is the protein that you eat. What about IGF-1 that is not related to the bones but to the entire body, such as the muscles? Is it controlled by protein too? This study measured long-term protein consumption in humans and the effects on IGF-1. The name of the study is Effects of Calorie or Protein Restriction on Serum, meaning blood, IGF-1 concentration in humans. I'm quoting, "Our data provide evidence that protein intake is key determinant of circulating IGF-1 levels in humans." Now, how does protein consumption exactly do that? You see, most of the IGF-1 we have in our blood is produced by the liver, but it's the protein that truly tells your liver what to do. When you eat, your liver counts how much protein you eat and make IGF-1 accordingly. The brain is also involved in this production, but this is a simplified version of it. In conclusion, the first myth is that protein is much more than a building block. The protein you consume acts as a hormone regulating drug in your body, and you can choose which hormone you want to activate and to which purpose. One purpose is muscle growth. This leads us to the second myth related to muscle building. Myth number 2. To build muscle mass, you need to eat a lot of protein all the time. It is a common belief in the fitness world that in order to build muscle mass, you need to consume a lot of protein all the time, all year round. This is not true because when you have elevated IGF-1 chronically, you can make your cells and muscles resistant to this IGF-1, reducing the growth signal from IGF-1, leading to a plateau of muscle growth. Because it's not just about how much IGF-1 that you have, it's also about the sensitivity of your body and your muscles to IGF-1. Let's hear Dr. Longo on the value of keeping your body very sensitive to IGF-1, how it can affect your body's rejuvenation potential.
And I think that might even help, again, keeping the IGF-1 receptors sensitized so that when you do have the proteins, everything is working very well. Everything is getting built correctly.
Sensitivity is how well your muscles respond and react to the growth signal coming from IGF-1.
The sensitization is going to make things a lot easier. Maybe this is why these women, that they were gaining muscle mass very easily, just doing 20 minutes a day of exercise.
Dr. Longo suggested that low-protein diet or fasting are usually followed by heightened sensitivity of the body to IGF-1, which activates massive rejuvenation potential of the body. This signal works best when you go from low IGF-1 to high IGF-1, meaning from low protein to high protein intake. This is the opposite of eating high protein diet all year round to build muscle mass, which is a common advice in the fitness world. This advice can actually make your muscle resistant to IGF-1, causing your muscle growth to plateau at some point. Does it sound familiar? Has it ever happened to you? So what happens when you shut down IGF-1 production and then increase it? This is exactly what I've done in this experiment. After many experiments on my body I'm going to share today about protein, I lost a lot of muscle mass. This is me at age 32. Lean, skinny, ugly, not a YouTube channel material at all. Then I decided I need IGF-1 right now, because it doesn't matter how much exercise you do. If you do not have enough IGF-1, you won't grow muscles, period. Therefore, I needed this IGF-1. And to increase IGF-1, I need to increase my protein intake. I could have increased my protein intake by 30% or 50%, but this time I decided to triple my protein consumption. I increased my daily protein intake from 48 grams to 150 grams. What would happen in my body? You can imagine. It would skyrocket my IGF-1. The result, in 4 weeks only, I gained 8 pounds of pure muscles at age 32, when my testosterone is definitely not in my peak, meaning I did not have the testosterone levels I used to have in my 20s. This is how powerful protein is when combined with intense exercise. But that's not everything. There is another secret I used. Before the experiment, I was on a low-protein diet, which caused my IGF-1 levels to plummet. What does it mean? It means that my muscles were extremely sensitive to IGF-1 levels. So when I skyrocketed my IGF-1 levels, my muscles were extremely sensitive to it, meaning IGF-1 has a much larger effect in the muscles. So to grow muscles, all I needed to do at this point is to cause sufficient muscle damage by very intense exercise that is not frequent, and allow the IGF-1 to penetrate into the muscles and make it grow. This is as opposed to constantly elevated IGF-1 that happens when you always eat high protein diet. So there is a value in cycling here. As you can see, you can play with your protein intake not only to control IGF-1 but also to control the sensitivity, which can enhance its effect. But let's focus right now on protein as a building block. On this role, how much protein does your body really need to function and maintain itself? This leads me to the next myth. Protein myth number 3. You don't eat enough protein. I will first qualify this myth to those under age 65. If you're over 65, you can skip this one. Now, let's go to the actual use of protein as a building block. How much does your body need? Let's hear from Dr. Christopher Gardner, who have been researching dietary requirement for over 30 years about how much protein humans require per day.
Now, here's an important question for you to think about. When you want to come up with protein recommendations for the country, what would you suggest recommending? Would you recommend the estimated average requirement? Because if everyone in the country got exactly the estimated average requirement, by definition, how many people would be deficient? Half, because it's the average amount. If you only get the average amount, the half of you that are above average, not just intelligently, but from protein requirement, would be deficient. And so when the US comes up with recommended daily allowances for protein, vitamins, and minerals that should be adequate for 97.5% of the population, they came up with a number that said 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight should meet that. So I have some US data that shows how much protein people eat in the US, and it's pretty much double the RDA.
So Dr. Gardner says that the RDA, the recommended dose of protein per day by the government, is a measly 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. To convert it into pounds is 0.35 grams of protein per pound. But it says a very interesting thing. It says that the RDA, due to the genetic variations, was designed on purpose to put 95% of the population in excess. It actually says that if you eat the RDA, you're probably getting excess protein. But there is even a more interesting point, which is everyone, including vegetarians, eat double the RDA. In essence, Dr. Gardner says that most people eat more than twice what their bodies actually require, turning this excess protein into sugar, possibly excess fat. And Dr. Longo, who researches protein for disease and longevity, seems to agree on the low protein strategy.
I'm Professor Valter Longo. I'm director of the USC Longevity Institute in Los Angeles. I also direct the Aging and Longevity Program at IFOM Oncology Institute in Milan.
Protein is very, very important, so you can have too much. Most people have too much. Low protein doesn't mean you're not eating protein. It means that you have to have the 0.35 grams per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you should have at least 35, 40 grams of proteins.
And low protein intake, but sufficient, low but sufficient. So there should be about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh 50 kilograms, it's about 40 grams of protein.
So Dr. Longo mentioned the exact same protein requirement. Ron Rosedale, who have been researching the impact of protein on aging, also discussed how much protein he found from his research that we really need.
I used to say about a gram of protein per kilogram of lean body mass. In other words, estimate what your mass is without any fat. What I would say now is that everybody should have 0.75, and you can even go lower. Protein content in breast milk is only about 1 gram per kilo per day. You will never, ever have a higher protein consumption than when you were a fetus.
Dr. Rosedale suggests determining protein intake based on lean mass, not weight. Lean body mass means my weight without the excess fat, because this is the part that really consumes this extra protein, not the fat. Being obese doesn't mean that you need to eat more protein, but having a large muscle mass does. Most importantly, this calculation leads to even a lower protein requirement than the RDA, suggesting that most people only need to eat between 40 to 60 grams of protein per day. You can get all that in just one meal. So is this true? This is all the protein that we actually need? Over the last 17 years, I've been testing that hypothesis on my body. I have been doing 2 types of tests. First, so I measure the impact of my protein consumption on the millimeter on my lean body mass. I counted on the gram my daily protein intake while tracking my lean body mass. Why did I do that? Because the muscles, besides giving us strength, are also a reservoir for protein. And if I ate too little protein, it would mean that my body would extract this protein from the muscles. And that would tell me that my body did not receive enough protein from food. Make sense? Then I did another thing, measuring urea urine test. Urea is a byproduct of excessive protein conversion into sugar. So it would tell me I consumed too much protein. And when you do this test, what you do is you count exactly your protein for the day and collect what comes out in your urine. If I ate excess protein, it would show up as urea in my urine. And when I did those tests, I've done it without exercising that day, with exercise, and also in days after exercise. I discovered something amazing I want to show you today. So I've done all of those tests, and you know how much protein my body needs? My body needed only 48 grams of protein per day, which translates to 0.75 grams per kilo of lean body weight. So Ron Rosedale pinpointed the exact protein intake that I have discovered on my body. And even though I'm rather lean, I'm about 6'1". I'm not that small. And again, it's lean body weight, it's not even body weight like they use in the RDA. This means that the RDA truly puts me in excess protein, exactly like Dr. Gardner said, and supported by Dr. Longo. But is this excess protein bad for you? Metabolically speaking, your body turns excess protein into 2 things: glucose, sugar, which in excess can also become fat, and urea, which is a toxin your body needs to remove via the kidneys when you pee, hence the name urine. These 2 are not pro-health. But the big question, how does high protein affect your longevity? We'll discover that today, but let's complete the protein requirement first. I want you to understand this first. As you can see, I tried all sorts of protein experiments and made many mistakes. Then I became something like what you see in this photo. This is before the muscle building experiment I showed you before. Now here's the most important thing that I want you to get from today. Am I telling you that your body probably only needs 40 to 60 grams of protein per day to maintain itself? No, because your body also recycles protein from within but that depends on your diet and age. Which leads us to the next myth. Myth number 4. Your body needs to eat all the protein it requires. I told you that protein is a drug, and it also controls other mechanisms besides IGF-1. This includes very powerful mechanisms in your body called mTOR and autophagy. Let's hear from Dr. Ron Rosedale, an expert in those very mechanisms.
And they found that the most powerful stimulus of TOR is protein. Lower TOR, you increase autophagy and mitophagy. You eat and recycle your own damaged proteins. Why is that important? Because it reduces your protein requirement. And if you eat a lower protein, low carbohydrate diet, if you lower TOR, you will increase autophagy and mitophagy, and without putting anything in your mouth, you will be increasing protein consumption. But not just any protein, you are increasing the consumption of faulty proteins, damaged mitochondria. That's great. You're getting rid of the junk, recycling it, and having protein to eat without having to put a thing in your mouth.
According to Dr. Rosedale, protein intake, besides IGF-1, also controls mTOR, which controls autophagy. Autophagy is the body's way of cleaning out damaged cells and regenerating newer, healthier cells. When activated, autophagy allows your body to manage a lower protein intake by recycling proteins internally. And it makes sense. Think about it. How did humans survive all these millennia with all the catastrophes on this planet? Also think about Holocaust survivors, war prisoners. We are built to survive under extreme conditions on very low protein consumption. How? Via autophagy. And as important, this autophagy activation turns the table completely on how much protein your body requires. With it, you need less. Without it, you need more. So suddenly, we need to separate our protein requirement from food to recycling. And practically, it means that we cannot answer the question of how much protein your body requires per day, and more specifically, how much protein do you need to eat without taking into account autophagy. So for example, in my case, my body needed only 48 grams of protein from food. But it doesn't mean that that's all the protein that my body consumed from the inside. My body probably required 70 to 75 grams of protein per day. And the difference between what I eat to the total was extracted from autophagy. To learn more about the activation of autophagy through exercise, you are invited to watch this video with over 1.2 million views, where I focus on exercise principles that help to keep your muscles young. But it begs another question. What happens when you turn off autophagy? Or what happens when it becomes less efficient with time? This leads us to another huge missing link to the story of protein. Can you guess what it is? Carbs and sugars. Myth number 5. Sugar and carbs intake do not affect your protein requirement. So it says that mTOR can turn off or turn on autophagy. What excess carbs and sugars do? They raise blood sugar and they spike insulin. What do excess insulin, excess carbs, and sugar do? They speak directly to this mTOR mechanism. mTOR which controls autophagy, exactly like Dr. Ron Rosedale said. These carbs and sugar tell mTOR to shut down autophagy. This recent paper from October 2023 speaks about that. It's called Crosstalk Between Autophagy and Insulin Resistance, Evidence from Different Tissues. I'm quoting from the researchers. Numerous studies have reported that autophagy response in kidney cells lower in insulin-resistant conditions. High glucose concentration in these cells lead to molecular changes, including the prevention of the normal autophagy response. So what do they say here? Insulin resistance is chronic high insulin, and high glucose means high sugar. Both prevent the activation of autophagy. And also very interesting, high levels of insulin from excess carbs can stimulate IGF-1 receptors, which also can shut down autophagy. IGF-1 stands for insulin-like growth factor, and insulin can stimulate the same receptors in the body. So practically, what does it mean? It means that when you eat high-carb, high-sugar diet, you shut down autophagy. And in essence, you shut down your recycling of protein, and in essence, you increase your protein requirement. Suddenly, lower protein diet doesn't work. But in addition, you also increase your aging rate. But why? First, higher sugar intake increases the damage that you cause to your protein. Let's hear Dr. David Sinclair who speaks about that.
Really, sugar is something that is known to be toxic. Sucrose, which forms glucose, will attach to your body's components. Your proteins will become what's called glycated, and that's known to drive aging as well.
So Sinclair says that sugar sticks to your protein, but now you need to remove them. But you can't because you shut down autophagy. So what happens here that instead of recycling damaged protein, you get more of them and now you accumulate them, as Dr. Ron Rosedale said.
It's really the garbage collection that will end up determining our health and our lifespan.
What does it all mean? You can't determine your protein requirement from food without looking at carbs and sugar intake. It means that eating low protein, high carb, high sugar diet will leave you malnourished. And we have plenty of people on this planet who consume this diet. Carbs are cheap and protein is expensive. And just like Dr. Rhonda Patrick says, those people suddenly won't get enough protein. So a lot of people in India and Africa have this exact diet. And this is not quite pro-longevity diet. And what we said about this low protein requirement may not fit them exactly. But that's not everything, because 99% of the world's population, developed or not, consumes excess carbs and sugar. Therefore, they do not fully activate autophagy. Yet in America, when the government determined the minimal protein requirement, they did not feed these people excess carbs and sugars in those experiments, which allowed those people to recycle protein, lowering in essence their protein requirement. Therefore, it is likely that for many people, the protein RDA, 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight, is probably not sufficient in unhealthy westernized diets. And it is reasonable to doubt this RDA, as Rhonda notes here.
Turns out that those studies that were done decades ago were using tools that were underestimating the losses of amino acids. It turns out, using new techniques that are more sensitive, the minimum amount of protein needed to take in is actually 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight, which is higher than the 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight.
So Rhonda says 1.2, but that's the exact point of Dr. Gardner. Most people in the developed world do eat double the RDA, around 1.5 to 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight. This is above the 1.2 number Rhonda mentioned. Therefore, almost everyone you know eats excessive amounts of protein, even compared to Rhonda Patrick's numbers. And most people also couple that with excess carbs and high sugar intake. And despite turning off autophagy, still, they do not need to eat more, just like Dr. Gardner said in the beginning. To summarize, the amounts of carbs and sugar you eat can affect autophagy, which in turn can affect how much protein you need to eat for your body to use as a building block. What about protein and longevity? Myth number 6, chronic. High protein is good for longevity under age 65.
What has been the biggest finding that you've found on extending lifespan and longevity in the last 30 years?
One of the biggest findings was the TOR pathway, right? So I think that was the initial central point, the discovery the TOR kinase pathway in aging. And then we followed that up with nutrition and the finding that protein restriction, as long as you don't go too far, too low, that's also central for aging and diseases.
Dr. Longo mentioned the TOR pathway as one of the biggest discoveries in aging in his lifetime. The same mechanism Rosedale mentioned before, remember? mTOR, TOR, same mechanism. And this aging pathway is controlled by how much protein you eat. But we've also have seen that protein directly controls IGF-1. How does IGF-1 affect your longevity?
People having too high levels of IGF-1, and this IGF-1 is then associated with mortality, early mortality.
Really?
This study speaks about that. The name of the study is Association between IGF-1 and all-cause mortality. As you can see in this graph, there is a sweet spot of IGF-1 and longevity. Too little or too much reduce your lifespan. I'm quoting from the researchers. Dose-response analysis revealed a U-shaped relation between IGF-1 and mortality. Both high and low levels of IGF-1 increase mortality risk, with a specific 120 to 160 nanograms per milliliter range being associated with the lowest mortality. So here we have a sweet spot for our IGF-1 blood tests. But this begs another question. If IGF-1 in excess is not good for longevity either, then does it mean that chronic, high-protein diet, which increases IGF-1 chronically, is not good for longevity? This study speaks about that. We examine links between protein intake and mortality. Respondents, meaning participants, aged 50 to 65, reporting high protein intake had a 75% increase in overall mortality and 4-fold increase in cancer death risk during the following 18 years. Why do you think it happens? Because IGF is a growth factor, and excessive stimulation towards growth in our bodies in adult stage can affect diseases that we don't want. And when you increase chronically a growth factor, what do you get? A growth, more cancer, and more death. Why would protein be such a potent controller of aging mechanisms? And why would it shut down autophagy, which keeps our bodies young? Let's talk about evolution for a second. From an evolutionary perspective, protein sends the strongest signal of abundance to our DNA. Why? Our DNA needs energy and building blocks to grow. When we consume sugar, it primarily signals an abundance of energy, but not the essential building blocks. Protein, however, provides both energy and the building blocks needed for growth, signaling to your DNA that it's the ideal time to grow. This abundance signal promotes growth, muscle growth, bone growth, at the expense of processes like autophagy and youth preservation. And another point. Think about it, we all agree that autophagy is critical for health, and autophagy is a protein recycling mechanism. Why would the body go the extra step to recycle what is already abundant? Hence the value of restricting protein when we don't need growth. And we have seen that lower protein diet activates autophagy, which recycles damaged protein and garbage. As Dr. Ron Rosedale said, it's really the garbage collection that will determine your health and your lifespan. But that's not everything about protein and longevity. Have you heard about caloric restriction? Caloric restriction is one of the most powerful strategies that we have today to extend lifespan in animals. Today, caloric restriction is a proven strategy to increase lifespan in animals between 25 up to 40%. And usually animals with caloric restriction have reduced level of IGF-1, because with calories they also reduce their protein intake. So here the researchers try to imitate caloric restriction in humans and to see if they get the same impact on IGF-1. What do you think they found? As you can see, caloric restriction alone hardly budged IGF-1 until the researchers reduced their protein. The researchers concluded, here we report data from 2 long-term caloric restriction studies, 1 and 6 years, showing that severe caloric restriction without malnutrition did not change IGF-1. Malnutrition means without reducing protein, and this is a human study, not animal study. What's the variation in protein they used in the study to see the impact on IGF-1? I'm quoting, reducing protein intake from an average of 1.67 grams per kilo of body weight per day to 0.95 grams per kilo of body weight per day for just 3 weeks resulted in reduction in serum IGF-1 from 194 to 152. I continue to quote, the short-term reduction in protein intake resulted in 25% reduction in serum IGF-1 concentration. And this reduction to 152 IGF-1 in the blood tests, this level falls exactly in the longevity target, showing the lowest mortality in humans. As you can see, even moderate to small variation in our daily protein consumption can affect IGF-1, just to show how powerful our protein consumption is. So you think caloric restriction is a powerful strategy? It's protein that it truly is. Even in dietary protein changes that do not seem extreme. They only change 1/3 of protein consumption. You can do that tomorrow. And you can play with your protein intake as you wish to achieve whatever goal you want to achieve. For this video, I conducted an experiment where I added 7 grams extra protein every day for 4 months, increasing my daily protein intake to 0.9 grams per kilograms of lean body weight. The original results you see here were fascinating. My IGF-1 levels came back at 156, comfortably within the longevity range from the IGF-1 human study, despite eating more protein. This suggests that, as a compromise, we might consume slightly more protein over our minimal baseline to enhance our physical conditioning without causing significant spike in IGF levels, which will accelerate aging. It's a good way to balance longevity with maintaining muscle mass. So chronically high protein diet under age 65 is not pro-longevity. But then you may think, what about plant protein? I've heard that it reduces cancer risk. This leads me to the next myth. Myth number 7. High protein from plants will reduce your cancer risk and extend your life. Dr. Longo speaks about that.
Luigi Fontana did a study where he was looking at the vegans, their IGF-1 was actually pretty high because they were high protein. They had such a high protein diet.
So even if you're eating a ton of plant-based protein, you can still drive up IGF-1.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, in our study, the people that had mostly plant-based, instead of a 4-fold increase in cancer risk, they had a 3-fold increase in cancer mortality risk. But it went from 400% to 300% increase risk.
Dr. Longo says that eating high protein from plants increases cancer risk. To explain, a high protein diet increases cancer rates in both vegans and carnivores. The difference lies in the level of the risk increase. High plant protein increases the risk by less, 3-fold rather than 4-fold, compared to lower protein intake, but it still increases the risk. I hope it's understood. And it makes sense because plant protein simply isn't absorbed in full compared to animal protein. So all in all, you get a bit less, but you still get the high protein. Also, Ron Rosedale was asked about this plant protein. Let's hear what he says.
Is there a difference in kinds of proteins? Yes, there is. There are certain amino acids that stimulate mTOR more than others. Leucine is the major amino acid that stimulates mTOR. You'll find more leucine in animal proteins. There is less mTOR-stimulating amino acids in plant proteins than there are in animal proteins. But the volume of protein you eat is going to outweigh the kind of protein.
So Ron Rosedale says it's the volume of total protein that we eat every day. And I can tell you another thing. I have made my muscle mass gaining experiment on 90% plant protein, and it worked. So high protein for vegetarians is not scot-free. Now, specific protein guidelines focus on health and longevity. Disclaimer: pregnancy, breastfeeding, child, growing, teenage years, all of these increase protein requirement. This video does not deal with these situations. For the specific protein requirement, you need to separate muscle building from longevity, and under age 65 to over age 65. So as we can see, under age 65, we need to consume, for longevity, 0.75 to 0.8 grams per kilograms of lean body weight. This is the baseline protein. But there are a few qualifications that we must say here. There is a genetic variation that Rosedale did not mention. Your body may need a bit more compared to what I have found in my body and what Dr. Ron Rosedale said. Second, this 0.75 grams per kilo of lean body mass is just a baseline. In days of intense exercise, I need to add somewhere between 10 to 20 grams of protein, depending on how many muscles I work that day, how large they are compared to small muscles, etc. And what I've discovered from my own experiments is that if the following day, after the intense exercise, my muscles still ache, I need to add extra protein above my baseline, as if I exercised that day, maybe a bit less, suggesting the body still repairs the target muscle that you worked in the previous day. It's a mistake that cost me a lot of muscle mass in the past. Also, I've done urine tests and I found that very little urea came out despite eating more protein in a day after intense exercise where my muscles hurt. So that tells me that exercise may increase the protein requirement even the following day. Also, as you can see, your specific minimum genetic protein dose can be determined by tracking your lean body mass, conducting IGF-1 blood tests, and for the super committed people, performing a urine urea test. And for muscle building, we have a separate course. And here I suggest changing the approach for a few weeks to build your muscle mass and then getting back to youth preservation mode. And another important note is that there are other things that can increase your protein consumption above that baseline. Chronic stress, recovering from illness, injuries and surgeries, any situation where your body needs to recover from damage and repair that damage. I would also not combine periods of poor chronic sleep with low protein diet due to the impact of cortisol, which can enhance the protein consumption in the body. But that's not everything, because I told you that if you're over age 60, this video can save your life. This leads me to the next myth. Myth number 8. Protein requirement is constant throughout your lifetime. Something happens in our body as we age that dramatically affects our protein consumption. And, on average, that change begins at age 65. Today I will show you what exactly happens in your body and provide a very specific 5 guidelines to aging and sarcopenia protection that I'm providing to my clients and my parents, not a personal recommendation.
We have all the data in the world to point to the devastation of sarcopenia on an aging population.
Sarcopenia is a term used to describe the loss of muscle mass and strength that occurs with aging.
I harp on that because it is in exactly that population that I am most concerned with sarcopenia. And we know full well that 2 things have to be true to avoid sarcopenia. Adequate protein intake, which as you age gets bigger and bigger. That number goes up and up and up, coupled with strength training.
Most people, or on average, people gain weight until 65, and then they start losing weight after 65. So it's something that we don't know what it is, right? But aging.
Autophagy is a mechanism, and like any mechanism, like any machine that we use, it becomes less efficient with time. And after age 65, on average, because you may be younger biologically than your real age, on average, autophagy isn't as efficient. What happens when autophagy becomes inefficient? Now you suddenly miss this portion of recycled protein, and you need to eat more. Instead of 50, you need to eat 70 or 80 grams. So you need this extra 20 to 25 grams of protein per day that you used to get from autophagy. In addition, over age 65, protein absorption, how much we absorb from food, goes down due to the reduction of stomach acid and digestive enzymes. And lo and behold, you need more protein. Also, other things happen such as hunger slows down, and over age 65, people begin to lose weight, but not in a healthy way. I mentioned IGF-1. What about it after age 65? It drops pretty significantly. In fact, you may get too little IGF-1, which can hurt the rejuvenation capabilities of your body. And this too low IGF-1 suddenly can reduce your lifespan, because even your immune system needs IGF-1 to replicate and protect you from other diseases, even against cancer.
We see the people that have too low IGF-1 doing even worse than the ones that have very high.
This study speaks about that. High protein intake was associated with reduced cancer and overall mortality in respondents over 65. And of course, it's more difficult to rebuild those tissues once we age, and once we don't have so much testosterone and IGF-1 and growth hormones in our bodies. Therefore, Dr. Peter Attia is right, recommending his older patients higher protein diets. As you can see, lower protein intake can be a powerful anti-aging drug up to age 65, and over age 65, it can become a dangerous strategy. These are 5 protein guidelines over age 65. This is not a personal recommendation, but things that you can use to customize with a healthcare professional. This is what I do with my clients and parents. Guideline number 1. Protein goes with resistance exercise. Over age 65, it would be incorrect to think about protein alone. More protein alone is not sufficient. It has to come with resistance exercise. You must add more protein to your resistance exercise. And you need to cover all the muscles that you want to keep, and you want to add a bit more frequency. Number 2, you must set baseline. How can you know how your body changes? You must know where you start today. So you want to measure at first your lean body mass, which means deducting the weight from your fat. For example, with a caliper, you can actually track your strength with the weights that you can lift. And IGF-1. Guideline number 3. I would start at age 65 with about 1 gram to 1.25 grams of protein per kilo body mass. And then I would reevaluate from there. Dr. Longo on his Facebook page suggested, I'm quoting, in seniors over 65, a low-calorie but nutritious and high-protein diet, 1 gram of protein per kilogram. So he suggested 1 gram per kilo, but I think if you exercise more as I suggest, then you need to be closer to 1.25 grams per kilo, because exercise increases your protein requirement. Another bad rule is to consume 1 gram in regular days and 1.25 in days of exercise or in days that the muscles ache after the exercise. The more intense the exercise is on that day, the more protein you need to eat. It's very important to say that this is just the minimal baseline. From there, the protein requirement will go up and up and up. And by the time you're 75, you may need possibly up to 1.5 grams per kilograms. But always consult your doctor at any point. Guideline 4. Consider adding pure protein powders. Collagen is a pre-digested protein. It's high in glycine, which increases longevity and doesn't activate mTOR, so it has a very good risk-reward ratio. Collagen fits perfectly for everyday use, and the best collagen is usually the one that combines both type 1 and 3. Another good pure protein you can consume is pure whey, but it fits immediately after exercise, not every day. And when I say pure, it means no additives. And guideline number 5, reevaluate your protein intake every 5 years. Protein requirement after age 65, very dynamic. We don't know how much your body absorbs, how well your autophagy works. In what shape have you kept your body over your entire life? So your body may change fast, 65, 70, 75. Hopefully not, but this is why you want to set a baseline and track from there. There is so much more to say about protein, fitness, and longevity, and aging and disease. Many more myths to discover and more tools to use. And don't forget to subscribe now to get more of these videos. And in the meantime, watch how to activate autophagy with exercise, a video that amassed 1.3 million views. This exact strategy is what helped my muscles to stay 10 years younger than my biological age, verified by the newest organ aging test. Watch it now.